Hello, and welcome to week 7 of the Psychology of Personality, where we're going to be getting a little philosophical because we are going to be looking at Viktor Frankl, Rollo May, and the emergence of existential psychology. Now, existential psychology, just like its kin in the world of philosophy, has to do with existentialism, which asks the big questions: why are we here? What is the meaning of life? Those kinds of things. I open up the chapter with some talk about the mythology associated with J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings. This is a very famous fantasy series. If you have not heard of it, I'd be surprised. The movies came out. I mean, a great, great piece of literature. And Tolkien was a linguist and very interested in the mythologies that help modern societies understand meaning for their lives. So where does it all fit into the big picture? And he wrote The Lord of the Rings as a myth for ancient Great Britain. Really, he understood it's a myth. He's not proposing it as a historical analysis, but is certainly putting it forth as the idea that we have to have sort of this ancient connection to humanity. What did it all mean in terms of the being on Earth and what we're supposed to do while we're here in the big picture? So when I was an undergraduate, I ended up doing some research projects on psychology and myth and encountered some pretty heavy reading and research that was been done on Tolkien's work. So it's not just a set of good novels, not just a set of good movies, but it's a really interesting foray into the world of literature and the role that it plays in terms of myth and the creation of meaning in our lives. So a lot of this chapter actually goes into the roots of psychology. Psychology has its roots in philosophy, and the philosophical existentialists formulate the history of existential psychology. So we have some characters that come up. We have Kierkegaard, who is known for his modes in which we approach meaning. And so the aesthetic mode characterized children and some adults focuses on the here and now, right in the kind of the sensory modes, because aesthetics being the study of beauty. The ethical mode is then is the one where we're taught. Maybe this is the Freud's superego. We're taught about doing good and the social contract and how we interact with each other. That provides us with meaning. Remember, that's the whole thing. So you have the aesthetic mode. Meaning comes from existence. I think, therefore I am. I'm smelling flowers. This is meaningful for me in the here and now. The ethical mode comes in terms of interactions with other people. And finally, you have the religious mode, which is a search or drawing. And we see this reflected also in Maslow's search and drawing for meaning within that particular vein in terms of self-actualization, the top level of his hierarchy. Here we have Kierkegaard talking about our search for truth, for the big picture, and the draw for many people to religion or philosophies or spirituality. And we continue to see that in our modern world, as these are needs that people have. We get introduced to a couple characters that are famous for their philosophies, Nietzsche and Sartre, who had viewpoints in terms of what reality was, and that Nietzsche, famous for his kind of nihilistic, there is nothing, we live, we die, and there's nothing, and the universe really, when you look at us compared to the universe is really big and we're sort of nothing. That sort of existential, wow, sort of thing. And the drive that we have is to deny that and to express in a tiny little ant-like way compared to the universe our will upon the universe, our will to power, to control things. Next, we have Jean-Paul Sartre, who kind of engagement, disengagement. It's kind of a way to look at this. Are we gaining meaning because we're just sort of like in the world, or are we actively participating in the world? And he used soy to be the I'm just simply in the world, and then prosoi, for me, an active agent. And we've seen that active agent component is like, are we just drifting along in this opportunity of life, or are we engaged in that opportunity of life? And then we move into kind of the focal points, the larger names, the people who are psychologists that applied this to understanding human behavior. And that is Viktor Frankl and Rollo May. Now, Viktor Frankl I'm much more familiar with because for a while I studied his concept of logotherapy. Now, logos is knowledge, and that's where we see psychology, sociology, biology, all the logos means the knowledge. So Viktor Frankl's logotherapy is a way of becoming, and that search for meaning, for transcendence through reading and knowledge. And so his form of therapy was to prescribe books to read, to poetry, music, to just expand yourself, and from there you could gain more meaning. So you had ways in which we arrive at true meaning in our lives, in his case through logotherapy. We do so by the work that we create, the product of our lives, and then we'll see that come up with Erickson when we talk about his generativity stage, the thing that we produced, our legacy. We also create meaning by the way that we encounter individuals and encounter love and caring for other people. So that gives us meaning. And finally, which is interesting, is how we deal with suffering. When we suffer, the realities of our life come into full relief, and from that we get the meaning of life. And it's an interesting take from Nietzsche, where suffering is inevitable, and there's this idea that suffering is inevitable here. But this is particularly relevant. Viktor Frankl's search for meaning philosophy has been very relevant, very informative in terms of people who have been through trauma, abuse, substance abuse, those kinds of things, that the true recovering individual is an individual who can find meaning in that pain. This is not something that you just dictate to someone and say, hey, there's a lesson in this, that kind of thing. That comes over time with knowledge, experience, and whatnot, so individuals find meaning in their pain, and it shapes them to be better people. Now, Rollo May, on the other hand, also an existentialist, focused on anxiety, similar to Freud. Freud was a lot about anxiety and our defense mechanisms. And so he talked about the difference, let's say, between normal anxiety, which is real threats to our existence, physical threats, or the pandemic, or financial threats and whatnot. Then there's neurotic anxiety, which feels the same, feels like it's an existential conflict that's going on, but it's more diffused and more vague. And we see those things sort of happening right now in terms of, as I'm talking about this, we're in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic, and at the same time, we're at a very critical juncture in our country's history in terms of a national election for president. And we experience these things as existential, but they're not a direct threat to our existence. They are a threat to ways of life. They're a threat to, and certainly some of the controversial issues are going to impact people very directly. But they're different. They're societal. They're, and I'm not saying they're less important, but these are the kind of ways in which we experience anxiety. And Rollo May kind of splits them up and says, well, there's real, something's going to end your life or end your lifestyle. And then there's these sort of neurotic anxieties where things are going to change and we're uncomfortable with those kinds of changes. And notwithstanding that, the predictions going on in terms of either the same administration or different administration, how we feel that might affect us. For some people, this may affect them in some very, very fundamental ways. And so it's important to recognize that there's the neurotic part is not necessarily untrue. It's not made up and it's not just me. It still has a truly existential piece to it. What we also got from Rollo Mayhauer was also like the type A personality. That whole type B personality. Type A is go out and do it, being competitive. Rollo May gave us that. Studying hostility in terms of how we interact with other people. And then the kind of dilemma of being a human being where we are both the subject and the object. Our experiment of our lives is a subjective experience, and we can sometimes perceive it as objective. And thinking about this philosophically, we can sometimes use the word I to describe, right? Let's borrow from. Go back here, borrow all the way from Kierkegaard and say I can talk about me as what I'm experiencing right now, the feelings that I have, the emotions that I have, very existential that way. But then I can talk about my goals. And I can say, well, I'm going to develop myself. And I actually look at that almost like a project, like a clay figure that I'm shaping. So we are both subjectively experiencing our psychology and development and change, and then we can also experience it objectively. Meaning we can say, okay, I'm working on myself, like it's something else, like it's something apart from me. And he really kind of, Rollo May kind of really focused on that is what makes his work so existential, that we can see our lives from those two perspectives. And talks about love, intentionality, our need for myth and stories and whatnot. And I want to kind of end with that because there's a very interesting body of work that's coming out about the American mythos. And what is the American myth? What are the heroes? You think about Greek mythology, or you think about Roman mythology, you think about Norse mythology and these heroes and powers and stuff like this, and what those represent in terms of the psyche. And we ask ourselves, what are the myths of America? And next time I do this class, it's going to be part of the course book because this is relatively new discoveries for me. Comic books being recognized as part of our existential mythology of America. And the superheroes, the Marvel universe as we now know it, the DC universe, different brands of comics, Superman, Batman, The Flash, Green Lantern, all of these, and what they sort of represent, particularly Superman. Superman's kind of front and center in this, fighting for truth, justice, and the American way. This superhero representing a connection to the past, present, and future for us. So this is the kind of thinking of this. Is really not necessarily clinical per se. It's a lot of descriptive, but certainly when people are depressed, for example, we're going to look at what do we do with all this stuff. When we're dealing with someone who has gone through trauma, has gone through has experienced racism or sexism or something like that, and we take that logotherapy to understand where people are coming from, to understand how society works, to go to college, take classes like this, do all that sort of thing, and we sort of capture that notion of this is there's meaning in this. There's meaning in your suffering. You're not suffering for no reason. There's meaning in your life choices. There's meaning in the direction of your life. There's meaning in things that happen to you. Now, these are all ways in which we can apply this sort of existential sort of perspective to you. And when I've been doing counseling, I can't even number the times that I've said to someone, they've described a situation, and I've said, maybe not going into existentialism, but what does this mean? What does this mean to you? Someone experiences a defeat. What does this mean to you? You know, the first time an Olympian gets a medal, or the time they get really close but don't get a medal, what does that mean in terms of your sense of self and who you are? And that's sort of that existential approach that we're capturing here. So this week there's only 2 discussions to kind of self-disclose and share what you think about here. First, we're going to consider Frankl's description of the 3 ways that we create meaning. That's through our life work, other people, and seeking higher meaning. I think that's, let me go back here and make sure I got those all right. The work that we create, human encountering love and suffering. We look at those things. What do you think about those kinds of things? Any personal experiences that you might have had about love? When I had children, wow, there you go. When I have suffered defeat, when I've been fired from a job, what did that mean in terms of my meaning? All of these things we can discuss in terms of important events, painful, joyful, otherwise work that you've created and stuff like that, that kind of defines who you are. And in the next discussion, we turn to May and this concept of intentionality. Is it possible to approach everyday tasks with intentionality? I didn't talk about this too much a second ago, but it's really sort of aligns with being in the moment, and you're vacuuming, and you think about the actual act of cleaning the carpet, or cleaning, and kind of seeing the miraculous in the everyday. And my daughter and I have talked about this. She has a remarkable ability to be bright and shiny, and she sees beauty in things, and she focuses on those things, whether it's a chore, or whether you're just walking in the woods and there's a single blade of grass and you can just look at that blade of grass, and it sounds really kind of funky, but you just look at that blade of grass and that it's real, that it's the molecular, when you study biology and you understand the complexity of these things, and it could be kind of mind-blowing. So I'm asking you to think about, how can we make everyday experiences peak experiences? We draw from Maslow again. How do we say, wow, I'm just doing this, like I'm just washing dishes, but there's meaning in this. I'm challenging you to do that. I try to do that every day, to find meaning in very small tasks. Makes for a very enjoyable day, I will tell you, I promise you. So go out and do these things. We're going to discuss them, ask questions about them, and I will see you on the online discussions.